And as a German, I think it is clear that Germany in particular has a special relationship with Russia. After all, it was the Soviet Union that freed our country from fascism in a war in which more than 25 million people from the Soviet Union sacrificed their lives. And also from a German perspective, we have to acknowledge that it was predominantly Russia to whom we owe the reunification of our fatherland. I do recall very well in 1990, at the time I worked in the GDR Volkskammer Parliament, when Mikhail Gorbachev accepted that Germany should be unified without having to leave NATO. Clearly, this understanding at the time was, regardless of whether it was ever formalized in a treaty, that NATO would not move eastwards as long as it was not transformed into a system of collective security of which Russia would be an integral part. I do also recall the speech of President Putin before the Deutsche Bundestag in 2001. By the way, that speech took place just 2 weeks after 9/11, in which he declared the Cold War to be over once and for all and offered that a system of collective security be established which would provide for security and stability in a world that was at the time in Russia as well as in the US threatened by a wave of terrorism. And let me quote the most important words of President Putin's speech. He said, and I'm quoting, "I am of the opinion that Europe will only consolidate its reputation as a powerful and independent center of world politics in the long run if it combines its own capabilities with Russia's human, territorial, and natural resources, as well as with Russia's economic, cultural, and defense potentials." I also remember the good, reliable, and mutual beneficial business relationship of my former employer Ruhrgas with Russian gas producers. A relationship that not only provided for economic prosperity for both countries, but also showed how strong economic ties can contribute to improved political relations between countries. And last but not least, I very well remember the very vivid and inspiring city partnership which the city of Düsseldorf has entertained with the Russian capital of Moscow during my 6 years as mayor of Düsseldorf between 2014 and 2020. Where do we stand today? We are far away from a system of collective security. On the contrary, NATO has moved eastwards, admitting all of the former Warsaw Pact states, and at the latest with the membership of the Baltic states, it has become clear that NATO considers itself primarily a military alliance against Russia. After Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, and even more so after Russia's invasion in Ukraine in 2022, all political, economic, cultural, and societal ties between the member states of the European Union and Russia have not only been suspended, but if we listen to the EU rhetoric, cut once and for all. 20 sanction packages have by now been implemented with the goal to politically isolate and economically ruin Russia. Whether this goal was achieved appears more than doubtful. Most of the sanctions have hurt the countries of the European Union more than Russia, and have not managed to isolate Russia internationally, as major players, particularly in the global south, do not endorse the Western narrative of the allegedly unprovoked, illegal, imperialistic war of aggression that Russia is waging in Ukraine. How can we overcome this situation? I guess it might be helpful to remember what President Putin said in the Bundestag in 2001. His message was that Europe will be marginalized unless the European Union and Russia join forces. Unfortunately, this message was not heard at the time. What we have experienced in the last 10 years was that step by step, all bridges between Russia and Europe have been demolished, and when we follow the dominant narrative in Europe, Russia has become the main enemy and biggest threat to Europe. At the same time, Europe's role in international politics has successively been marginalized, with the US and China becoming the dominant powers, and Western Europe being no longer a partner in leadership with the US, but increasingly sidelined and humiliated by it, whereas Russia runs the risk of becoming a junior partner of China. This is not a good perspective for our continent. What we need is to push the reset button in our bilateral relations. We have a historical blueprint how political hostilities and cleavages can be overcome and Cold Wars can be ended. I'm talking about the policy of détente as it was designed by the former German Chancellor Willy Brandt. He understood that it is common interests and shared challenges that can pave the way not only to peaceful coexistence, but to mutually beneficial political and economic relations. If we believe we have to fight for ideologies or absolute values, I believe we are on the wrong track. What can bring us together is the understanding that we have to jointly overcome challenges that threaten the very existence of our societies, such as an uncontrollable arms race, the rise of religious fundamentalism and terrorism, also our demographic challenges, as well as environmental destruction and climate change. And it is, of course, in our interest that we understand that Europe, and we should not forget that Russia is in terms of size and population the largest country in Europe, can achieve so much more if we follow President Putin's recommendation and combine the capabilities of the European Union with Russia's resources and potentials. The first step to do that is communication and exchange. If we want to overcome hot and cold wars, we need to talk with each other. We need to reestablish relations on all levels: cultural, societal, educational, economic, and of course political. Maybe reviving city partnerships as the one between Düsseldorf and Moscow would be a first step in this regard. With communication, mutual understanding will grow, and also the acknowledgement of commonalities and, where they do not exist, complementarities to our mutual advantage. I strongly believe that it is time to open a new chapter in European history, and I'm talking about Europe as a whole. Let me finish my remarks on a personal note. You may have heard of Jacques Tilly. Jacques Tilly is the artist who designed the floats for the Düsseldorf Carnival Parade. It is part of his job that he's not supposed to have any respect, neither for world leaders such as President Trump or President Putin, nor for local leaders such as myself when I was mayor of Düsseldorf. This is simply the tradition of Carnival in the Rhineland. You may have heard Jacques Tilly was recently sentenced in absentia by a Russian court to 8.5 years in prison for some floats dealing with President Putin. It is clearly not my job to criticize the Russian judiciary system. But I want to be honest, and I'm not saying that simply because I'm a friend of Jacques Tilly. Such a verdict not only ignores long-standing carnival traditions in Germany, it also plays into the hands of those Russophobic ideologists that try to make us believe that Russia should not be part of Europe. Thank you very much.